Greetings, Divine Masters of the Light, and welcome. I'm very grateful that you are here today. So in today's video, we will be discussing the 9 steps on how to release your negative ego and not to kill it. Do you want to slay your negative ego? Or do you want to release your negative ego and then transform it into a positive ego? Yeah. You see, if you go after your negative ego with a butcher knife, figuratively speaking, or any other, it's going to run and hide, and it's going to be underground, and it's no fool, and its game is survival at all costs. Your goal is to find your negative ego immediately, and once you find it, release it from its responsibilities, set it free, and turn it free from the constraints and the constrictions you have forced it to labor under. Then to convert the ego and build it into a positive ego, because see, now you realize that you need an ego, for ego is part of who you are. It's that you don't need to function negatively, you don't need to be sick, you need it to be very well and function positively. It's not a dog that you shoot when it's inconvenient to deal with. You repair it, you reconstruct it, and you rebuild it. So perhaps in the human potential movement, with the simplistic answer of slaying the ego, if you come across it on your path, to stomp it, squash it, to really get rid of it in any way that you can, be sufficient at that level of sophistication. Perhaps within the metaphysical movement as well, simply handling the ego with platitudes and with grand plans and statements of intent was sufficient. Maybe simply ordering it away was all right. But now, as you are unfolding your spirituality, that indeed you are, you must deal with your negative ego in ways you have never dealt with it before. So to release and build that energy. So those 2 components, the negative and the positive ego, are what we want to talk about. So the first thing you do to release the ego is, what is your better than? Your better than basically boils down to the fact that they are stupid and they are very sad and a very pathetic thing that you carry around. Your better than doesn't have a real basis, does it? It really doesn't, if you think about it. So in releasing the ego, it's helpful to list them all and then pick the ones you want to work with. Then overlay each better than with the reality you created yourself. So if your better than is because you are more attractive, etc., that is something you created in metaphysical sense. It's not something that was given to you. Why does that make you better than? When someone less attractive created themselves that way for whatever reason. It just doesn't make sense. It may be true, but why does that make you better than? So maybe your better than is you are more intelligent, more spiritual, more loving, more forgiving, more risk-taking, more smarter, richer, from a better neighborhood, faster, just overall better, right? These sorts of things we would suggest here when you overlay it with the fact that you create your own reality. And it doesn't make any sense, unless of course you really aren't overlaying it with you create your own reality. Okay, once you have done that, see that ludicrousness, because all better thans basically boil down to the fact that they are stupid and they are very sad and a very pathetic thing that you carry around. These better thans that have no real basis. If you can even pretend the basis is there, they really don't have one. Okay, the second step to release your negative ego is to look at the hurt that you have done in the name of ego. The hurt that you have done to yourself, but more specifically, the hurt that you have done to other people. The hurt and the potential damage you have done to others. Right? Now, more important, that latter, because sticking with the former can throw you right into self-pity. Oh boy, look at how my ego has hurt me all these years. Oh, poor me. It's gotten the best of me. You can revel in that and get intoxicated and hung over the next morning, right? With guilt and all that self-pity, but you're right in the same place. We have seen the hurt you have done to others, that it can also induce some self-pity. If you continue to focus on what you did to others with your negative ego, then you won't feel sorry for yourself. Indeed, you can't, for the only way you feel sorry for yourself is by turning the attention back on yourself. So if you keep it out there, and the people about who you cared for, or the people in your reality that you are dealing with, the hurt you have done to them, really own that. Well, it's not that bad, it's okay, etc. So what? No, own it for what it is. And the hurt you have done to yourself, own it for what it is. Brutally own it, absolutely. Okay, the third step to release your negative ego is specifically look at what are the short-term and long-term ramifications of your negative ego. Right, in terms of releasing the ego, of course, is dealing with the payoffs, right? By hanging on to this ego, which I know is ludicrous, stupid, and rather pathetic, right? That I know is hurting other people and me, but I am going to hang on to it because of why? Then go through the categories of payoffs, you know, that you get to avoid and avoid responsibility and take the easy way. Who do you get to punish, others or yourself? Or who do you get to love, right? What do you get to do with the righteousness around the ego? I have a right to be right, or you like to dwell in your own self-pity, complain to every person the same story over and over and over again like a broken record of how your life is just not working out for you. Or you get to think of your self-importance, or you are the best healer, which is spiritual ego. So what guarantees do you want? I'll release my ego if I have the guarantee of still being egotistical. I really get to be better then. Promise me that, and I'll release it. What are the guarantees you're holding out for, Divine One? How much do you enjoy self-pity? What are you getting out of playing self-pity? Well, I know I have the most terrible, despicable, ugly, destructive ego ever. Poor me. Now you have the most animated ego. That's all you got. How much self-pity are you getting out of it? How about how much self-importance? Well, I tried to transform my ego, but I can't do it. It must be real. What is the self-importance? Look at what I can do better than you. I was chosen, but you are not. All the self-importance around the very issue of I have tried and I can't do it. Can someone else do it for me? Or I've tried to release it so much now that I guess I'm going to have to take a deep breath and transform it. Serious business here. How much self-importance? So what are you afraid to lose? The treasured past is so spectacle with selected delusions. Afraid to lose being an adolescent, child, having to give up the heyday of your life 20 years ago or 40 years ago. How panicky it must get to be old. Get further and further away from your hay rides. Feel more and more alienated and more alone, right? You ought to sometime go down by the city park and sit on a park bench and look at some of these people, some old people. They were once 18 years old and fairly attractive. That old man with old person clothes, he used to be a kid. He used to have a sandbox day too. He used to think someday I'm going to be great. Now he's sitting there by that old woman all baggy. One day she looked in the mirror and thought, oh, how beautiful she was, just like you do. God, that can be scary as hell. Yes, it is for them too. But you see, the further you get away from it. So what are you afraid to give up? What are you afraid to lose? Payoffs. As you look at your payoffs, not necessarily all of them, but pick the ones that are you. All of them, list them like crazy, which ones are real for you. So honestly, look at what are the short-term and long-term benefits, because you see often the short-term are I get away with it. Hey, the short-term effect is covered. I got an extra day. I got an extra week. I got to cover. I denied myself one more time. I avoided life one more time. I avoided responsibility one more time. I lied to myself one more time. I snuck out by the skin of my teeth one more time. However, the long-term impacts is that there is this negative ego leading me. You know, what primrose path am I on? Short-term and long-term impact. Okay, so the fourth step to release your negative ego is, what is my negative ego fantasy? Because you all have one or more or several. What is my negative ego fantasy? My negative ego fantasy, what we mean by that is, what is the choice of my destruction? What is the weaponry of my destruction? What is my ego fantasy? Okay, so my negative ego fantasy is, what we mean by that is, what is the choice of my destruction? What is the weaponry of my destruction, and what is my negative ego fantasy about my undoing? We would suggest here that in this particular regard is a way to discover yourself. Release what you can about the ego and transform that which is not releasable. You need to look and figure out honestly, what is that negative fantasy? For some of you, it is ending in death and destruction. Okay, some examples are often, for those who hold it better than an example of intelligence, your particular fantasy deals with something like this, that you would go insane and be degenerate, that you are a misunderstood genius, a person before your time, that you are a grand and beautiful genius, bordered on insanity, and you went over the edge. Isn't it sad? That's where your intelligent fantasy goes, somewhere in that. It's not exactly that, but somewhere within that realm. That you would rise to the top and be recognized for your genius, and somehow you would go crazy or berserk, something of that sort, and it would crumble around you, and it would be sad, a great melodrama, a tragedy of the hugest count. If I'm successful, it will all fall apart. There is a fine line between the intelligent and the insane. So for those of you who hold a financial better than, because you have money, your particular negative ego fantasy is to go broke, end up poor, make horrible business decisions, that you have no money and no one will give you any, and you must live in the gutter on the street corner, sleeping underneath paper bags and boxes, drinking cold, with wholly rotten clothes, etc. That's your fantasy. That's what you really desire from the negative ego point of view. Oh no, it's not what I want. I want to become richer and more famous, etc. Maybe before you get there. Maybe that will be your route, but there is nothing more dramatic than the rise and the fall of great wealth. That's your negative fantasy. For those of you who have your better than because you are more loving and kind, your negative ego fantasy is that you are really evil and that you are a devil or satanic of something or other. For those of you who hope your fantasy is to be the world's greatest lover, male or female, husband or wife, your fantasy from the negative ego point of view is to be what? All alone, to lose the one you love, to fail in marriage, have many partners, such as adultery, no responsibility, no showing love, no affection, hiding, always fighting, etc. Whether you are male or female, it doesn't matter. But it would be fantastic, and lose that somehow. Get vaginal or prostate cancer of that sort, or end up alone and unable to express the sexual gift and great wonder that you have. That's your negative ego fantasy. For those of you who have a better than because you have thousands of friends, your fantasy from the negative ego point of view is to be all alone, to lose the ones you love, living in a tent by yourself all alone with nobody, but to live all alone to end up with no friends. So for those of you who have a better than because you are the best mother, the negative ego fantasy is your children will hate you when they grow up. They'll never talk to you again. And you will be an old woman all alone. Successful kids out there somewhere that never call home and never come to visit. So for those of you who have a better than because you're more spiritual, your negative ego fantasy is to be taken over by the dark forces and destroyed. No, yes, your negative fantasy is, it's too scary and too hard to be spiritual. I'll just get taken over by the dark forces. I know it, negative ego fantasy. So for those of you who have a better than, to be the best healer there ever was, your negative ego fantasy is to make you fail at healing and to make you the worst healer with constant screw-ups and hurting the client with bad healing practices. So for those of you who have a better than, like the supreme or hidden talent is often your negative fantasy, is to never be recognized for dying a pompous death, and only after your death having those come forth to recognize your greatness. For those of you who hold a negative ego fantasy, what is it? Because you all hold it. What is your demise? What is your grand exit? Your negative ego. Please do not take us literally. That's all it is. But to be looking in that direction. What is my better than? And what is the opposite of that? And to realize that is what I'm really after. That's what my negative ego is going for. No, yes. To me, negative ego is pretty much the opposite of what you would like. That's where it is important to own it. To really honestly look truthfully at this negative ego fantasy of your demise, of your unfolding, we will be reaching the pinnacle of success to only receive certain illness and die. Is it to reach some level of failure to only then be finally discovered and recognized a little too late? What is your fantasy as you honestly look to find your negative ego fantasy? And admit it, to face it honestly. Tell yourself the truth about it. No softening it, just telling yourself the God or Goddess honest truth, the gut level, gut ripping honestly level truth. This is what my negative ego had in store for me. This is the outcome my negative ego wants for me. It says to stick with me, kid, I'll make you rich and famous. But in fact, it wants me to die, cold and freezing on the street corner. It says, stick with me, kid, and the world will applaud your grandeur. But in fact, it has this picture of me drunk and stoned, dying of liver disease, eaten up inside by alcohol and worked to death. Finally recognized after a life of pain and misery and self-denial. What is the opposite that is what you are after? And when you can really understand that, you can see, okay, you can intellectually get it, of what we are saying. Yes, that is the opposite. That's what I want there. I got it. But when you can let that sink in and feel it, realize now that you have mentioned it. I can remember those times openly minded daydreaming, and those thoughts have run through my head. For example, I'm going to be a great healer, and my negative opposite is I will fail as a healer. Yes, they have gone through my head. I can be aware of sometimes almost wishing for it, feeling a certain relief if that were true. You can start owning it in your gut. Oh my God, that is what it is. We would suggest here, after the fact, this person even got off on a bit on the negative fantasy. Wow, look at that. Isn't that bizarre? So we would suggest here, those are not something unique to that person. That is something everybody does in a certain extent. There's a certain turn on to your negative ego fantasy. When you own it and experience that turn on and excitement, and sometimes even sexual excitement, that can be generated by thinking about what it would be like to be entrenched in that particular negative ego fantasy. So what is your negative ego fantasy for you? What does it say? My negative ego fantasy is I end up living in whatever you think about. Be a terrible place to live. And that's it. Tell yourself the truth. What is your negative ego demise? What is it? What is its end for you? And as you look at it and realize that this is what my negative ego is, this is my negative ego's short-term and long-term impact, and this is my demise. If I let my ego run my life, this is what is going to happen to me. By that point, you have told yourself the truth. It's pretty sobering experience, isn't it? So we would suggest here that in this particular regard, the way to discover yourself, release what you can about the ego and transform that which is not releasable, so be it. Now as you look at your papers of where you have written your better than, and if you take one of those just for a moment, think about, this is my better than. What is the antithesis or direct opposite of the better than? Then to see what part of me wanted to have that, or has fantasized about having that, or has let the fear of having that become paramount in me. How often do I respond against that fear? If you are having it as a fear that you're motivated to avoid it, it's obviously something you want or wouldn't be there to avoid. you wouldn't need to avoid it. Beautiful steps to transforming and releasing the ego, particularly one that won't release. If I can't release it, it won't release, really meaning I won't let it release, then obviously you want to hang on to it. Not because it's going to get you or, the goodness, but because it will destroy you. That's why you want to hold on to it. What does that destruction look like, divine ones? Alright, the fifth step to transforming and releasing your negative ego is to generally forgive yourself. Right? Forgive yourself for the hurt you have done to yourself and others. Right? So, go through the process of forgiveness. Because if you don't forgive yourself, our ego will dump all over yourself. So you're going to decide you're not worthy or deserving. You're terrible, you're disgusting, you're a low life, and there is no hope for you. You might as well get it over with. That's why it's important as a fifth step to forgive yourself. And that means going through the process of what you want. Why do you want to forgive yourself? And what does the child, the adolescent, or the parent part of you say? What does the ego part of you say? What do you say, and what are you going to do? To go through the forgiveness, in conscious or unconscious, meditation through the gathering together and offering the gifts or forgiveness, seeing that self that you want to forgive, that arrogance, that ego, that better than, less than, better than, less than, the destructiveness, and has your end as its goal, your demise as its goal, and to forgive yourself for having bought it and playing into it. Forgive yourself for being so naive. Forgive yourself for not thinking, not growing up, not being responsible, for looking for the simplistic of the answer with no consequences. Forgiving yourself for the hurt you have done and the stupidity and the patheticness of your existence. Forgive yourself for the hurt you have done to yourself and others. Forgive yourself for being so goddamn stubborn and you continue to take your payoffs even though, quote, you know better. To really forgive yourself and have some compassion for yourself. Oh, hey, I forgave myself with no more ego. No, that's just halfway though. Forgive yourself and your ego will release. Alright, so the sixth step to transform or release the ego is how do we want to be instead? How do you want to be without ego? Not with a new ego, just without ego. How do you want to be without ego? And what would your life, be like instead? Rather than going around with my nose scraping along the ceiling because I am better than other people, or less than other people, with my nose scraping along the floor, because I am worse than other people, which is the same position. So what do I want to be instead? Well, I want to be nice and kind and friendly to people. I want to smile more and have a skip in my step more. Start doing that. People, moment by moment, I want to be happy instead of being in my miserable negative ego, right? Do it for 10 minutes. I just can't see myself being happy or sober for the rest of my life. Well, don't worry about that. Just do it for 10 minutes. I'm going to be happy or sober for 10 minutes now. Now, can you see yourself doing that? Maybe. So I want to be giving. I just can't see myself giving for the rest of my life. Don't worry about it. See yourself giving for 10 minutes. What you may realize is you want to be more caring for people. You realize on your self-centered ego, you really don't care a damn about anybody. Do you want to be more caring? Well, don't decide I'm going to be more caring from this day forward. For the rest of my life, you will fail at it miserably. That's your ego making that decision because it's trying to sabotage you. Rather, just try to care for people for the next 10 minutes. If you can make it through 10 minutes, then try another 10. If you can make it through a second 10 minutes, take a deep breath and try for another 10-minute stretch. It may sound a little bit ludicrous, right? You were kind for 30 minutes, but that's 30 minutes more than yesterday. Maybe tomorrow you could do it for a 40-minute stretch. Or you might even dare risk the whole day. Can you see yourself really feeling positive about who you really are? That's what I want. I want to be done with this anger and hate and stress and worry and pity. I want to be done with this criticism. I want to be done with this. Can you see yourself positive, being cheerful for 10 minutes? Maybe you can't believe it for a lifetime yet, but can you see for 10 minutes? Of course you can. You can do anything for 10 minutes, divine ones. I want to be sober and clean instead of trapped in ego fantasies. Do it for 10 minutes. I just can't see myself being sober for the rest of my life. Don't worry about that. Just do it for 10 minutes. I'm going to be happy and sober for 10 minutes. Now, can you see yourself doing that? Maybe in just a minute, just for today, just for now. Then 10 minutes more, 10 minutes more, then 10 minutes more, 10 minutes more, then 10 minutes more. And then all of a sudden, you have done an hour's worth. Having done an hour's worth, can be happy for 20 minutes. And maybe that's all you can manage today. But tomorrow, right? Can you do it for 20 minutes again, and already you got an hour or 2 hours? Maybe it's going to take you a week to get to a point where you can be what you want to be for an hour a day, then 2 hours a day. And before you know it, it's a whole day, then 2 days, then a week, then a month. Then you can start seeing, by golly, I can do this. Whatever it is, I want to be more efficient and more responsible, perhaps, for my actions. Just try to be responsible for 10 minutes. The ego sets you up in the back that says forever. I decide I'm going to be nice now, and I'm going to be the nicest forever and ever, no matter what anybody did or said. That's your ego speaking and setting you up to fall within 10 minutes, and you will. Either you will fall because you won't do what you said, or you will start getting better than because you did. Look at me, I said I would do it, and I did. I haven't done a nasty thing in 4 days. Look at me, I'm truly better than for reasons I didn't even know for this. This is wonderful. So for 10 minutes at a time, and then go get that one down as you can do so without getting sick. Then maybe you can go an hour at a time, and maybe a day at a time. We would suggest while you are approaching a day time, you are probably being that person you want to be, with a few slips ups, right, here and there, but you don't smash your head about. Rather take responsibility and put it right. So if it has to go by that minute play, then it's worth it. Figure out what you want to be instead of your ego and do it, minute and moment by moment, one day at a time. Don't give up, because you can't imagine doing it this year or for 20 years. Because after 2 hours you failed. You fell short. The ego will come back in and say, hey, see, you can't do it. Give up. And don't get rid of your negative ego. Keep it, like everyone else is doing. That's when you go at it again for another 10 minutes, another 10 minutes of being cheerful, of being happy, of being loving, being sober, being giving, or being caring, and being loving, right? Decide what you want to be and be it. So be it. So the seventh step to transform and release the ego is to tell yourself the truth. Are you done or not with your ego? If you're done, say it, know it, and be done. If you're not done with ego, say it, know it, and figure out how much longer you have to go through it. How much more? We are not saying you are bad and terrible and wrong. No, tell yourself the truth. I'm not ready to be done with my ego yet. I'm getting too many payoffs. I'm having too much fun. I'm enjoying the fantasies that my ego seeks. Or I'm manipulating too heavily. I'm not willing to get rid of my better than, etc. Tell yourself the truth, divine ones. At least you know who's loading the gun then. At least you know who is producing the destructiveness. And even though you know it's you, at least you know you won't be slowing yourself down and deluding yourself from at least that truth. So tell yourself the truth. How do you build a positive ego? Once you have handled this negative ego and indeed processed the several steps, you talk to yourself and say, I'm done. It's gone. That's it. Get behind the ego. You see, then you created a void, an opening, a space, and an ego that isn't anymore. Something has to fill that space. If you don't, your ego will. You see, that's what happened all along. You created this space. Nope, no one is taking responsibility for the form of your life. No one is taking the responsibility for the context of your life. No one is handling the content in context and form of your metaphysical or spiritual life, so the ego has to. If you eradicate the negative ego, then leave that empty spot. Something has to go fill it. And just like a child digging on the beach, when they dig a hole in the sand, if you don't put something in it, there's going to fill back in. And you'll be like that child, constantly digging yourself out from your ego. So once you clear it, you have to put something in, and that's where you build a positive ego. And that is done through a video I posted on how do you build a positive ego. The 8th step in terms of releasing the ego is to allow yourself to be more than you are. What we mean by that is, what are you? Well, right now, you're a physical being, right? And allow yourself to be more than that. What does that mean, Divine Ones? Allow yourself to also be aware of yourself as a metaphysical being, and even as a spiritual being. To start reviewing your reality and yourself in that reality. Not denying your physicalness, or placing it with metaphysicalness, or spiritualness, but instead adding to it. There is a difference in somatics there, but it's more than just somatics, it's a real difference. So when you think of yourself as just being a physical, then most definitely you are functioning like an animal, usually stuck around the second chakra. And, unfortunately, many of you who are lead around by your cocks of vagina, and put very bluntly, that's what you are. Your posture is terrible or whatever, purely physical, being seeking instant gratification. That's not to deny immediate gratification, but to see yourself and let yourself experience yourself being more. Let yourself realize that you are physical, but you can also be a metaphysical being. Not just think metaphysically, not just into metaphysics. It's a strange phrase, you know. Are you into metaphysics? I wasn't aware of it. It's that feeling and sensing yourself as a metaphysical being. So what does the metaphysical part of me think about this? What does the metaphysical part of me view when looking out over this reality? What does the metaphysical part of me think about this problem? What does the metaphysical part of me think about this success? To add that on to the pleasure of the physical and the security of the physical, add on to it, don't deny the one in favor of the other, but instead expand to physical and metaphysical, and then go as far as to be a spiritual being. How does the spiritual side view this reality, this problem, this success, this relationship, this friendship, this communication, this book I'm reading, and the ideas that are wafting through my head right now? So be physical, metaphysical, and spiritual. Okay, it's not that simple. It's that easy, but not that simple. You have to work at it, develop it, and expand into it. You do not destroy or create. You either expand or contract. And as you contract it into physical beingness, purely human animal, as you add to that to become metaphysical, and add to that, and you become spiritual. You would suggest does not remain room for the ego to function in its dominating, destructive way. There only remains room to function in an appropriateness as the messenger, as the eye to which you view reporting the data that you then form and analyze. There's no room. Now that's also fertile territory for ego. I'm a spiritual being, better than others. I can't deal with the moral problems of life, traffic, chores, tickets, policemen. Don't you realize I have more important things to do? I have a mission, a task. You're on a mission from God. My mission really is important, more important than yours. That's when you drop being physical and try to be spiritual, metaphysical. Only face it, folks. You're physical. That's a body you're sitting inside of there. Whether you like it or not, it's there and it's yours. And as you can accept the fact that you're physical and then expand to be physical and metaphysical and spiritual, then you become more full, Divine Ones. The 9th step in terms of releasing the ego, we would suggest the final category is if you have attempted to release the ego and simply for whatever reason have not allowed yourself to do so, then for God's sakes transform it. The reason we make a distinction there is, we said first of all, because it involves thinking and is an essential part of it, okay? But what's involved here is that it is less strenuous and exhausting to release than it is to transform it. Therefore, we would not necessarily transform endlessly. That is something you need to do. We would jump to that. The conservation of energy is what you're looking at. So if this is a releasable ego, we would release it because it takes less strenuous and less energy to do so. We would suggest it is just as easy to transform or release. It's not a problem to snap both of them, but that is part of the problem perhaps, but nonetheless it's an exertion of energy. We would suggest here that the ramifications or the repercussions or whatever you want to call them, the aftershock of releasing is more gentle than after the shock of alchemy transforming. Therefore, if you can release, do so, but if it is one of those situations where it just isn't working or can't, then go straight for alchemy transforming it, and in that sense, not live the consequences because they are not negative, but expend energy, but be willing to accept the aftershock, so to speak, of the quake, of busting that loose. So those are sort of the parameters that one would use in so determining, and oh God, that makes it a bit confusing, doesn't it? Well, absolutely, and that's good. Complexity is a very healthy aspect of your reality. Ease of complexity and intricacies are very important. We would suggest simplicity in that way is avoidance and a cop-out. We would suggest not only avoiding the issue, but also priming the pump from very difficult times, most definitely. You see, Divine One, the thing about ego is it doesn't make any sense to hold on to it, does it? Right now, it's bloated and gluttonous, and as you force it on a starvation diet, a fast, then it will shrink back to normal size again. How do you do that? You do not do that by being critical of yourself. No matter what you do, oh wow, that's really neat. No, don't tell me that. Don't give me any feedback of positive nature. Just give me negative feedback. Leave me on the straight and narrow. We suggest here that's not going to do it. Ego would say with the message, hey, look, I'm doing better than I thought. I'm probably doing it better than everybody else. I am faster, cleaner, better, and more powerful than anybody. He said 10 minutes of being happy. I've been going for days. Wow, look at me. Don't give it back to your ego. Your ego will try to make it itself better than others. Instead, give the positive nourishment. It's like food out there on the plate. Don't give it to your ego. Don't feel better than. Give it to your conscious mind, right? Feel value. Let yourself feel the awareness. Let yourself feel worth. Let yourself feel the esteem, the confidence, the respect and love. The realization to follow is to feel that value for yourself. Don't feel better than, just feel the value. The positive feedback that you give yourself or give from others uses that as a tool, as a stepping stone to reach higher rather than as a goal or a hammock to lie back in. When you get a piece of positive feedback, use, or just that, let me take this information to let me stretch further. That's feeding it to your consciousness rather than, well, I got them fooled as well. I'll just lie back and relax now. I got them all convinced I know all the answers, so I can just shut up and sit back now. No. We would suggest here that as you work with it in that capacity, continuously feed your consciousness by taking every bit or as much as you can of the positive information in your life and turn it into a tool to use it to stretch and reach further divine ones, to see farther divine ones, down the line, to lift the fog a little more rather than to rest on it. Oh well, I've accomplished that. Look at me, everybody thinks I'm wonderful. Stop right there. The latter feeds, right? The ego, the former, needs the consciousness. And as you do that, thinking about it consciously, doing that. Decide whether I'm going to be done with my negative ego or not. Make the decision. By the time you get to this step forgiveness, this step is going in that direction moment by moment or day by day until you feed the positive side of you. right? Feeding the conscious part of you. Starve your ego of what's left of it. By then, you can make a decision. You can look in the mirror and say, yep, I'm going to change. Look in the mirror and say, nope, I will not let the ego come back up again and throw me around and treat me like dirt. We would suggest here that starves the ego back to its position. Yeah. So release and transform your negative ego, Divine Ones, into a positive ego. And thank you for listening to me today. This is Chris Parr, Syrian and Lemurian Wisdoms and Teachings.